She looked me right in the eyes, took a sip of her tea, and said, "You're a burden, Mom." Just like that. I blanked, completely stunned. Her words hit me like stones, sinking straight into my chest. What she didn't know was that I still held the deed to that house, the same house she painted last summer, calling it her sanctuary, the one I paid for with every extra shift, every holiday I worked through, every little piece of myself I gave up over the years. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just smiled, and the very next morning, I picked up the phone and called a realtor. My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm a mother, I'm a widow, and up until recently, I've been far too forgiving. Have you ever been called a burden by your own child? What would you have done? That Sunday afternoon, the light poured through the kitchen window, soft and golden. It caught the edge of the mint blue teacup in her hand. I had bought it for Haley when she moved out the first time, heading off to college full of ambition and plans. Back then, she used to call home every Sunday. These days, she barely looked up from her phone. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. The autumn wind rattled the windows, and outside, yellow leaves danced across the lawn like confetti no one celebrated with. I had made mint tea for her. She hadn't asked for it, but I remembered it used to be her favorite. She didn't thank me, just placed the cup down without taking a sip and stared out the window. I can't think here," she muttered. "This house makes me feel stuck." I nodded. I didn't push. She'd been brittle since the divorce, like dry glass that might crack at any moment. And then, as if she'd practiced it, she said it. Calm, clear, like a knife set down gently. "You're a burden, Mom." The air went completely still. Even the leaves seemed to freeze. She didn't look at me after that, just stood up, pushed the chair back, and walked upstairs. Her slippers made a soft sound down the hallway, like nothing had happened. I sat there, the tea cooling in my hands, just staring at the empty chair she left behind. I didn't say a word, but inside, something shifted. I remembered David's voice, like it was yesterday. It came back to me so clearly, like he was right across the table. "She'll forget the words, but you won't." He said that once, years ago, when Haley slammed her bedroom door and screamed that I never understood anything. I cried in the laundry room for an hour that night. David came and sat with me on the floor, wrapped me in a blanket. That now, there's no one left to bring me a blanket. Later that evening, I opened that hallway drawer, the one that always stuck, and pulled out the pink folder. Inside was the deed. Still my name, still my signature, still my house. It wasn't revenge I felt, just a quiet kind of clarity, like fog lifting. I smiled, not from happiness, but from something deeper. I still own this house, and she had just given me permission. I walked back to the kitchen and opened my phone, scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a name I hadn't seen in months. Joanne, realtor and friend. I looked at her name, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I didn't press it, not yet. I just stood there, tea long gone cold, the room unchanged. But somehow, everything felt different. I didn't make the call, not that night, but something inside me had already shifted. If you've ever sat in your own kitchen and suddenly realized it doesn't feel like yours anymore, just know you're not alone. Tell me, has someone ever said something to you that you still carry, even years later? I'd love to hear your story, if you feel ready to share. Sometimes saying it out loud makes it a little lighter. And if you'd like to walk this road with me, you're welcome here. Because this isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's ever given too much and found themselves wondering who they are without the giving. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what she said. though those words were still echoing, cold and sharp, but because of the silence that followed. Haley didn't look back. She just left her mug on the table and walked upstairs, like I was nothing more than an old piece of furniture in her way. The next morning felt like a curtain closing on a stage I no longer belonged to. It was Monday. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, but I could already hear the low hum of the washing machine and the slow, dragging tick of the wall clock in the kitchen. I stood there barefoot by the stove, holding a coupon in one hand and a half-used onion in the other. I had planned to make meatloaf, the one she always used to ask for on her birthdays, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I boiled some water and dropped in a pack of instant noodles. It's strange, isn't it? I used to pack her lunch with carved fruit and little handwritten notes. Now she's under the same roof, and I eat alone. The kitchen felt too big, too quiet. I moved through it like I wasn't really there. At some point, I wandered into the garage. I didn't even know why. I just found myself standing among shelves of old paint cans, forgotten sports gear, and plastic bins labeled with things like Christmas and Dad's stuff. One box in the back caught my eye. It was a little dented, taped unevenly, covered in dust like everything else. I pulled it forward and opened it. The cardboard creaked like old bones. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bundled together with yarn. Some were from David, some were from Haley, back when she was in college. I stopped at one with her college seal. I remembered it clearly. She sent it after her first solo art show. I used to reread it whenever I missed her. I opened it again. It started with, "Mom, no one ever believed in me like you do. You're the reason I kept painting." I read it slowly, like tasting something I hadn't had in years. Her handwriting was different back then, younger, looser, full of hope. I folded it gently and tucked it back in the envelope. I didn't cry, but something inside me softened, or maybe shifted. Haley didn't come home until dusk. I heard the door unlock. She didn't say a word, just walked past me in the hallway without even looking. No smile, no greeting, just a shadow slipping upstairs, like she was renting a room from a stranger. And right then, it hit me. She was still taking up space. Her shoes were by the door, her perfume still lingered in the air. Her judgment seemed to walk into every room before I did. I was shrinking around her, folding myself smaller, quieter, bending around her anger. That night, I sat at the dining table with the folder holding the house deed in front of me. In the back, I found David's note, written in his calm, steady handwriting. It said, "Leave this to her. She'll need it someday." I held the paper in both hands, picked up a pen, and I underlined those words. Then I whispered, "She doesn't need it. Not anymore." My voice trembled, but my hand didn't. I stood up, walked into the study, and turned on the computer. The screen lit up, and I caught my reflection. Older, yes, but not broken. I opened the browser and typed in, "Sell home discreetly, Colorado." Each click of the keyboard echoed in the quiet like tiny nails being driven into something final. And yet, inside me, everything felt calm. Some decisions don't come crashing in. They arrive quietly, like fog slipping through a cracked window. You don't even notice it at first, not until it's wrapped around your ankles, and suddenly, nothing looks the same anymore. I didn't pack a suitcase. I packed a plan. It started with a text. I wrote, "Need a quiet favor. Coffee?" Joanne replied in minutes. "The Sparrow and Cup, 8:30. The cafe was tucked between a dog grooming shop and a secondhand bookstore, just behind a row of golden-leafed oaks. It still smelled the same as it did 20 years ago. Cinnamon rolls, fresh espresso, a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of something new. I got there early, wearing jeans, an old navy cardigan, and no makeup. I didn't want to look put together. I wanted to look like myself. I brought a small notebook with me, not my phone. There's something about paper that makes things feel more permanent, or maybe just more real. Joanne walked in with her hair pinned back and sunglasses resting on her head. She had that quiet confidence of someone who'd built a good life. She saw me, smiled warmly, and didn't say a word about how tired I looked. She asked, "Still order the same thing?" I nodded, "Still do." We sat with our cappuccinos and talked about that high school play where she forgot her lines and I broke a heel backstage. We laughed, both of us knowing we weren't really there to reminisce. Then I leaned in and said, "I want to sell the house." Joanne blinked. Her smile held, but I could see the pause in it. "You're serious?" I nodded. "I need you to keep it quiet. No signs, no listings, just a private appraisal, discreet." She looked at me a little longer than felt comfortable. Then she tilted her head and said, "You're not the same Maggie I used to run errands with." "I'm not," I said, "or at least I'm trying not to be." She took another sip, slower this time. "You've got a month. I'll help however I can, but after that, I'll need to put it in the system."
Understood. Before we left, she placed her hand on mine. "Are you sure you're ready to walk away from everything?" I looked her straight in the eye, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't hesitate. I'm not walking away. I'm walking back to myself. It wasn't until I got back in the car that I realized I never told Haley where I was going. I just left her a message that morning, "I'll be out, don't wait up." She didn't reply, and honestly, I didn't need her to. On the way home, I stopped by the hardware store and picked up a can of pale green paint, soft and cool, the kind that reminds you of spring mornings. It wasn't for her room, it was for mine. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a while. The house stood in front of me, not any bigger than before, but somehow it felt different, like a body I'd lived in for years, but never really claimed as mine. I looked down at the key in my hand. Same shape, same worn edges, but for the first time, it wasn't a key to keep someone in. It was a key to let myself out. After I called Joanne, things didn't feel lighter. They just started moving. It was like I had nudged a small stone downhill, and now it was slowly picking up speed. You'd be surprised how quiet a house can get when your presence no longer fills it. It wasn't the silence that got to me. It was the feeling that nothing in the house recognized me anymore. I moved from room to room like a ghost in my own home. Outside, the wind brushed against the dry leaves, whispering across the windows like a memory trying to come back in. I stepped into the hallway with a cardboard box under my arm. On the side, I had written, "Keep, do not move," in big capital letters. I placed it gently in the corner of the closet, right next to the coat David used to wear the fall before he passed. As I folded sweaters and tucked away photo frames, I remembered a drawing Haley made when she was 6. It was just crayons on construction paper. She had drawn me holding a little house in my arms, and underneath, in her messy handwriting, she'd written, "Home is Mommy." Now that little girl was barely ever home, and when she was, it felt like I was the guest. I had scheduled the real estate photographer to come at 2 in the afternoon. Haley had a nail appointment at 1:30. Timing things that way had become its own quiet strategy. The photographer showed up right on time, carrying a zipped black case and an easy, polite smile. She moved through the house quickly, clicking through shots, adjusting her camera like she'd done this 1,000 times. I stood off to the side and watched her take pictures of the living room where we once set up our first Christmas tree. Then the dining room, where there were still faint wax marks from candles we used every Thanksgiving. She paused for a moment at Haley's door. I told her, "Go ahead." Inside, the posters were still on the walls, clinging like they didn't belong to the rest of the house. A half-finished painting leaned against the desk, full of deep purples and bold orange swirls. The whole thing took maybe 30 minutes. The photographer left just as quietly as she came, no fuss. I sent the pictures to Joanne. 10 minutes later, she replied, "We can list anytime."
No pressure, just a door quietly opening. That afternoon, I stepped onto the back porch with a cup of lukewarm tea and my notebook. The porch creaked beneath me, a sound I'd gotten used to over the years. I sat down, let the sun warm the backs of my hands, and started writing a list. David's coat. My books. The ceramic bluebird from Mom. Nothing from Haley's room unless she offers it. And then, right at the bottom, I wrote one last line. I am not leaving because I'm unwanted. I'm leaving because I finally want something. Peace. It caught me off guard how firm that sounded on paper, how much it felt like a truth I'd been waiting years to say out loud. I was still sitting there, the notebook half open in my lap, when I heard the garage door. Too early. Haley's heels tapped across the floor. Then I heard her voice. "What's all this?" she asked, looking over the boxes I'd stacked in the hallway. I closed the notebook and stood up calmly. "Just organizing," I told her. "It's that time of year." She frowned, but didn't say anything else. And just like that, the moment passed. But something settled in me. She was starting to notice. And I realized I no longer needed her to understand in order for me to keep going. Some things aren't exactly lies. They're just truths wrapped in silence, because saying them out loud might do more damage than the quiet ever could. Lately, Haley had been asking more questions, and I'd started giving fewer answers. Halloween used to be my favorite. I'd hang little paper ghosts on the porch, carve pumpkins while Haley giggled behind me, covered in pumpkin guts and glitter. Now the decorations were all hers. Plastic bats, a neon boo sign, a playlist thumping through the walls like a heartbeat I couldn't quite keep up with. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and microwave popcorn. I stayed upstairs. From my room, I could hear the music and the clinking of glasses. Laughter floated up through the vents. Haley's friends were downstairs, dressed up like fairies, vampires, old TV characters. I didn't peek. I didn't have to. I sat at the edge of my bed, laptop open, rereading Joanne's email. The photos looked beautiful, almost too beautiful. The living room was so bright and open. The kitchen looked spotless. It didn't feel like someone lived there. It looked like the kind of place someone would want to run away to. Right under the photos were the appointment details, blinking on the screen. Private showing, November 3rd, 11 a.m. Then came a knock on my door. "Mom?" Haley's voice was muffled. "Why are you packing stuff lately?" I closed the laptop, stood up, and opened the door just a bit. "Just decluttering," I said. "You should try it sometime." She raised an eyebrow and leaned against the doorframe. Her eyeliner was smudged, and for a second she looked more like the teenager I remembered than the woman she was trying to be. "You're not going all Marie Kondo, are you?" she joked. I gave a small smile. No folding tutorials, just needed some space. She didn't push, just nodded and said, "All right, just checking." And then she turned and walked away, her footsteps fading back into the music. Later that night, after the last guest had gone and the house had gone quiet, I moved slowly from room to room. I slipped a few things into a tote bag: David's watch, my wedding ring, a bundle of old letters tied with ribbon. I placed the bag gently into the trunk of my car and locked it quietly. Then I stood in the backyard, wrapped in my cardigan, and looked back at the house. The kitchen light was still on. Through the window, I could see Haley standing at the sink, laughing at something on her phone, holding a half-eaten cookie. That was the same kitchen where we used to decorate cupcakes together, where we painted Christmas ornaments, where, once, I was the center of her world. And now I was outside, looking in. There wasn't room for me in her version of this house anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Joanne. "Offer incoming. They want to move quickly." The glow from the screen lit up my face in the dark. I just stood there, staring at it. A breeze passed through, rustling the trees behind me. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime let out a soft, broken tune. I didn't feel regret, not yet, but I knew something was coming, and when it did, I wouldn't fight it. I'd let it move through me, like wind through the leaves.
and I wouldn't hold on. The offer came. It was quiet and professional, just an email in my inbox titled Final Closing Documents. No fireworks, no tears, just the silence I needed. I thought I'd feel more, but by the time everything was finalized, I had already let go in my heart. All that was left was to follow through. Haley was away for the weekend, something about a hiking trip with friends. I didn't ask, and she didn't offer details. That was how things worked between us. I moved through the house in socks, each step soft against the hardwood. Room by room, I made peace. In the living room, I paused and dusted the edge of the fireplace, right where we used to hang those mismatched stockings. In the bathroom, I wiped down the mirror and caught my reflection just long enough to whisper, "You made it." Then came the kitchen. Always the kitchen. I left an envelope on the counter. Inside were the house keys and a printed note for Joanne. It said, "Keys enclosed. Please forward final documents as planned. Thank you for everything." Next to that, I placed another envelope. This one was handwritten. It didn't have a name. It didn't need one. "You once called this your sanctuary, but you made me feel like a guest, so I've left it for you. A gift from the burden." I didn't leave out of anger. I left because staying had started to feel like erasing myself, and I had done enough disappearing for one lifetime. Before locking up, I took my time, walked slowly through the halls, touched the doorknobs, straightened the picture frames. In the laundry room, I folded the last towel. In the garage, I looked once at the empty hooks where David used to hang his tools. It was cold outside, and the wind smelled like the start of snow. Leaves scraped across the driveway as I loaded the last box into the trunk. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, just sat. No tears, no deep breaths, just presence. Then I drove. The road out of the neighborhood felt longer than it ever had, but I didn't look in the rearview mirror, not even once. About an hour later, somewhere along I-25, I reached behind me and pulled a small shoebox into the front seat. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper, the last letter I ever wrote to myself. I am not a burden. I am a woman rediscovering her own weight. I read it once, then closed the lid. Not everything has to be said out loud to be true. By the time I reached Fort Collins, the sun was dipping behind the rooftops, casting gold across every window. My new neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, not accidental. I turned onto a small cul-de-sac and slowed in front of the last house on the right. It was simple, one story, brick trim, a neat little lawn with a gnome wearing a scarf. And on the front door, a sign moved gently with the breeze. It said, "Welcome home." I parked the car and stepped out, holding one bag and a key that felt heavier than any I'd carried before, not because of the metal, but because of what it meant. I walked up the steps, paused, then with a steady hand, I turned the key. And for the first time in years, I stepped into a space that truly belonged to me, not because someone else made room, because I did. If you've ever felt like you were slowly disappearing in your own home, I hope my story helps you feel a little less alone. Have you ever walked away, not out of anger, but to finally protect your peace? I'd love to know, what moment made you realize it was time to choose yourself? Feel free to share in the comments. I read them, every single one. And if my journey resonates with you, you're welcome to subscribe. There's more ahead. And in the next chapter, well, let's just say, starting over isn't as quiet as I thought. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like quiet, the kind of quiet that hums through the morning when no one else is awake, the kind that wraps around your shoulders, not to smother, but to remind you that no one's watching, no one's judging, no one's needing anything from you. That first night in my new place, I made dinner for one, just a bowl of lentil soup, a slice of rye bread, and an apple, sliced neatly and arranged like a fan on a blue plate. No one frowned. No one asked, "Is this it?" It was. and for the first time in a long while, it was enough. The apartment was small, just one bedroom and a living room barely wide enough for a love seat and a bookshelf. The kitchen had yellow tiles and a leaky faucet that dripped steady, like a heartbeat. I only brought what mattered: my books, a few framed photos, and the little bluebird figurine my mother gave me when I turned 30. I placed that bluebird on the windowsill. Then I rearranged the books, alphabetical, just for me. I paused before setting down the last photo. It was a candid of myself from years ago at a picnic. I was laughing, the wind in my hair, holding a paper plate piled high with pie. For the first time, I put that photo right in the center of the shelf. The apartment was quiet, but the walls felt warm. Down the hallway, someone was baking. I could smell cinnamon and clove drifting under the door. Birds were still chirping outside, even though the air had a bite to it. Earlier that week, I saw a flyer at the community center: watercolor class, beginners welcome. I'd never tried watercolor. David always said oils were more forgiving, but maybe that was the point. I wasn't looking for forgiveness anymore. So, on Wednesday, I went. The room smelled like acrylics and coffee. The instructor was a wiry woman with white hair pulled tight into a bun and a voice like gravel soaked in honey. She pushed a palette toward me and said, "Try watercolor. It's soft but honest. You'll see." And I did. My hand trembled, but my heart didn't. After class, a woman about my age, maybe a little older, held the door open for me.
"First time?" she asked. "Yes," I smiled, "in more ways than one." Thursday morning, there was a knock on my door. "Hi, Bear," said a short woman with wild gray curls. "I'm Linda. I live next door. We're having a small Thanksgiving dinner next week, nothing fancy. You'd be welcome." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because I couldn't remember the last time someone invited me without expecting something in return. "Thank you," I said. "I'd love to bring a pie." Linda grinned. "That'd be lovely." That evening, I opened a notebook and wrote just a few sentences. I left because I was erased. I stay gone because I finally see myself. I signed my name at the bottom. It felt strange how something so small could feel like a declaration. As I closed the notebook and set it beside my tea, there was another soft knock. It was Linda again, holding up a little pie tin with a wink. I laughed and said, "I'll make mine from scratch." And I meant it. This year, I wasn't baking because anyone expected it. I'd bake because I wanted to, because the pie would come from my hands, and this time, someone would notice. I thought I had left the past behind, but the past has its own way of reaching out. Sometimes it writes letters. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address, no stamp, just my name, written in that soft, angled handwriting I used to recognize without even thinking. I turned it over slowly, like the paper might bite. The seal wasn't licked shut, just tucked in gently. That was always her way, even as a little girl. She'd close birthday cards like that, like she was never quite sure if what she'd written inside was enough. I stood by the window, holding the envelope in my hand. Across the street, the park was almost empty, just two kids kicking a soccer ball in the wind and a man walking his golden retriever at a slow, steady pace. I made tea, Earl Grey, no sugar. The steam curled up around my face while I sat down at the table, the envelope still unopened. But even before I opened it, it already said plenty. Eventually, I read it. It wasn't long. Haley never liked writing. She said it made her feel too exposed. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she missed me. She asked a question. "Did you really leave because of what I said?" I read that line twice, then again. My fingers pressed the paper flat against the table, but it kept curling up like it wanted to disappear. She said she was cleaning out the house, that she found a photo of us tucked behind the silverware drawer. I remembered that photo. David took it. We were laughing, holding a bowl of mashed potatoes far too big for the two of us. I must have slipped it there during the holidays, years ago. I stood by the window, holding the envelope in my hand. Across the street, the park was almost empty. Just 2 kids kicking a soccer ball in the wind, and a man walking his golden retriever at a slow, steady pace. I made tea, Earl Grey, no sugar. The steam curled up around my face while I sat down at the table, the envelope still unopened. But even before I opened it, it already said plenty. Eventually, I read it. It wasn't long. Haley never liked writing. She said it made her feel too exposed. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she missed me. She asked a question. Did you really leave because of what I said? I read that line twice, then again. My fingers pressed the paper flat against the table, but it kept curling up like it wanted to disappear. She said she was cleaning out the house, that she found a photo of us tucked behind the silverware drawer. I remembered that photo. David took it. We were laughing, holding a bowl of mashed potatoes far too big for the 2 of us. I must have slipped it there during the holidays, years ago.
She also said she found my note. She didn't quote it. She just wrote, "I read it. I'm not sure what to do with it." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because for once I knew I didn't owe my voice to anyone, especially when silence felt like the better choice. Instead, I opened my diary. I wrote slowly, letting each word settle like dust on the page. I left because of how I felt when you said it, and because I finally believed I was worth more. I folded the page carefully and slipped it into the small wooden box by my nightstand. The box still carried a faint cedar scent. Inside were other scraps, a receipt from the ingredients I used for that pie, a paint-stained napkin from my first art class, and now this letter to myself. Later that day, I walked to the park. The air was crisp, the kind that paints your breath in the air. I didn't take my phone. Just a blank notebook and a pen with a little scratch in its ink. I sat on a bench beneath a bare maple tree. Its branches looked like memory, soft, fading, but still standing. I opened the notebook. For a while, I just stared at the page. And then I wrote, "You should know." That was it. No name, no greeting, just a beginning. Maybe I'll finish it someday. Maybe I won't. Either way, that first word was mine. Forgiveness doesn't need an audience. It just needs truth. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her, but I knew I had already forgiven myself. It was Thanksgiving morning, and the air smelled like cinnamon and nutmeg, soft and warm, like a shawl wrapping around my shoulders. The sun slipped through the clouds just enough to light up my apartment window. I placed the pecan pie on the counter. That pie had been my specialty for years. I'd made it every Thanksgiving. But this time, I didn't make it out of habit or duty. I made it because I genuinely wanted to. Linda's house was only 2 blocks away. I walked there slowly, taking in the bare trees, the quiet hum of ovens working behind closed doors. Her place stood small and proud, dressed up with a fall wreath and a welcome mat that simply said, "Come as you are." Inside, it smelled like roasted turkey, baked stuffing, and shared stories waiting to be told. Linda greeted me with a hug and a smile. Her living room was full of quiet joy. People were chatting, laughing, passing plates around. We were only 6 in total, all a little older, all carrying something we didn't talk about, and somehow all a little lighter just by being there together. I placed the pie on the buffet table. Someone glanced over and asked, "Who made this? It looks amazing." I said, "I did." Ruth chuckled and said, "Bless your hands. That crust looks like it came from a dream." After the meal, we sat in a loose circle, each of us holding a warm cup of cider. Linda asked gently, "What are you thankful for?" People went around the room. Still having my garden. My son visiting last week. A clean scan after chemo. Then it was my turn. I cleared my throat and said, "I'm thankful for learning that being needed isn't the same as being loved." The room got quiet. Not awkward, just respectful. I continued, my voice steady. "I sold my house this month.
the one I lived in with my husband, the one I thought I'd grow old in. I left it because I realized I wasn't truly welcome there anymore. Everyone listened. No one cut in, no one tried to tidy it up, and when I finished, they clapped. Not loud, but long enough that my throat started to tighten. Ruth reached over and touched my hand. "It's never too late to come home," she said, "even if you have to build it yourself." Later, after most people had gone, I offered to help with the dishes. I stood at the sink with my hands in warm suds, looking into the little mirror above the faucet. "This is what healing looks like," I whispered. Not loud, but real. When I got back to my apartment, I changed into my old gray sweater and made a cup of tea. Then I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote, "Tomorrow, I start painting again." Underneath, in smaller letters, I wrote, "The Burden and the Sanctuary." That would be the title of my first painting, and this time, it wouldn't be about how others saw me. It would be about how I finally saw myself. If any part of this feels familiar to you, if you've ever had to let something go just to find steady ground again, I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever walked away from something, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself? Feel free to share in the comments. I read them quietly, like little letters left on the kitchen table. And if you'd like to stay with me on this journey, you're welcome to subscribe. There's more ahead. In the next chapter, something from my past shows up where I least expect it, and I have to decide whether to open the door or keep it closed. Peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means being able to remember without the pain. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, not to paint a house or a room, but a feeling. It was early December. The cold had settled in gently. No snowstorms yet, just a soft chill that made peppermint tea taste like memory. I moved my armchair closer to the window, cleared out a little corner of the living room, and set up a small wooden easel I'd bought from Michael's. There was something quiet and beautiful about creating a space that belonged entirely to me. The new watercolors I ordered online sat beside a mug of freshly sharpened pencils. Soft jazz played on the radio, just a slow hum in the background. I looked at the blank page. Then I closed my eyes. And what came to me wasn't the blueprint of the old house, not the structure, not the cold siding or sharp corners. I saw the light that came through the curtains in the morning. I felt the silence in the kitchen, heavy and dull. I remembered the smell of apple pie cooling on the counter and how no one ever said thank you. I dipped the brush into the water, then into the blue. My first stroke was shaky, but I didn't stop. I didn't try to fix it. I wasn't painting for approval. This was just for me. Slowly, the old house began to take shape. Not with bricks or lines, but through color and memory. I painted what it felt like to stand inside it, and then what it felt like to walk away. There were no people in the painting, just light and space and a doorway. Mid-morning, Linda stopped by with a paper bag full of homemade peanut brittle. She knocked lightly and called out, "Still painting, or can I come admire?" I smiled and let her in. She stood next to the easel, arms folded, eyes soft as she took it all in. "Is this," she started, then paused. I nodded. "Where I lived, not where I live now." She didn't say anything at first, just handed me the brittle and said, "Looks like peace." We made tea and sat by the heater, talking about Christmas decorations. She told me about a little ceramic tree she found at the thrift store with those tiny colored lights. I told her I might hang a wreath, nothing big, just something small to say that this place is mine now, that I belong here. After she left, I went back to the painting. On the back, I wrote in careful letters, "A house is not a home." And then, for the first time in years, I signed it. Not Maggie Ellison, not Mom, just Margaret Lane, the name I was born with, the name I nearly forgot. I stared at that signature for a long time. It didn't feel like rebellion.
It felt like coming home. Later that evening, Linda sent me a text. "Are you joining us for the tree lighting this weekend?" I replied, "Yes, I'd love that." Then I looked through the photos I'd taken of the painting, not to share, not yet, just to see it with some distance. It didn't look perfect. It didn't have to. It looked like something I could stand beside. I had just set my phone down when Linda messaged again. "Have you thought about showing your work?" I looked at her question for a while, then I typed,
Not yet, but I've thought about showing up. For myself. And this time, I didn't hesitate before pressing send. It wasn't closure I was looking for, I just needed clarity. The knock came just before sunset. Not loud, but it carried 6 years of weight. I had been hanging a simple garland above the window, fake pine with little white lights. That knock made me stop, hand still on the thumbtack. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there. She looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe that was just the surprise of seeing her again. I opened the door. "Hi," she said. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, her coat unzipped, cheeks pink from the cold. In her arms, she held a plastic container wrapped in a kitchen towel. She held it out without looking up. "Cookies," she said. "I baked, well, kind of, from a mix." I didn't say anything at first. I just took the container and stepped aside so she could come in. She hesitated at the doorway, like she wasn't sure if the door might close again. Then she stepped through slowly. The apartment was warm. I'd lit a cinnamon candle, and for some reason, I'd already set out 2 mugs. We sat at the table. She glanced around. "It's nice here," she said quietly. "Thank you," I answered. There weren't any accusations hanging in the air, no apologies either, just the steam rising from our tea and the smell of cookies she didn't really bake. After a long pause, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I wrote this," she said. "I didn't know if I should say it or write it. I figured maybe this way you'd have a choice." I didn't open it. I just placed it next to the cookies. "Thank you," I said. Her eyes welled up a little. She blinked it away. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." I nodded, holding my mug. Neither did I. There were 1,000 things we didn't say, and maybe that's why we were finally able to talk at all. She looked at the tiny Christmas tree in the corner, just 2 feet tall, wrapped in ribbon I'd found in a discount bin. No ornaments, just light. "Do you still make hot chocolate the way you used to?" she asked out of nowhere. I smiled. "Too sweet, with whipped cream?" She laughed, then shook her head. "I used to hate that. Now I kind of miss it." We didn't hug, but the silence between us had softened. She stood to leave after maybe half an hour, adjusted her coat, tucked her hands into the sleeves like she used to when she was little and trying not to cry. "Can I visit again sometime?" she asked. I looked at her for a long second. Not the little girl she used to be, not quite the woman she would become, just someone trying. "You can try," I said. She nodded, and honestly, I think that was more than she expected. I stood at the window and watched as she walked back to her car. The red of the taillights blinked once as she pulled away. Back at the table, I picked up the letter. Inside was just one sentence, written in that same familiar handwriting I used to see on sticky notes and grocery lists stuck to the fridge. "I don't know how to love you right, but I'm trying." I folded it slowly and slid it into the drawer next to my paintbrushes. There might be time. Not to fix the past, but maybe enough for the trying. It doesn't take a miracle to change, just a decision. It was New Year's Eve. No party, just me, a brush, and a blank canvas. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft sound of jazz playing in the background. A single candle flickered on the windowsill, casting a warm, golden light across the room. Outside, the night was still. No fireworks yet, just the hum of the radiator and the soft whisper of winter wind against the window. I sat at the table with my notebook open. On a fresh page, I wrote, slowly and carefully, I am allowed to live for me. No resolutions this year, just intentions, quiet ones. Next to me was my latest painting. Not a house, not a memory. This one was an abstract portrait. Shades of blue, gentle orange, a streak of silver. It wasn't meant to be understood, just felt. It looked like movement, like starting over. Earlier that afternoon, I baked a small cake, vanilla with a little almond. No frosting, just a dusting of powdered sugar. Simple, enough. Linda had texted around 8. Wishing you light and love tonight, Margaret. You deserve both. I sent her a photo of the cake with a little caption, sweet things ahead. At one point, I thought of Haley, not with sadness, just with softness. We hadn't spoken since the letter, but last week a small package had arrived, a tiny potted succulent. The card said, for your windowsill, still learning how to care. I placed it next to the candle. The hands on the clock moved closer to midnight. I stood up, walked over to the window, and cracked it open. The cold slipped in, kissed my face, and made the candle flicker. I closed my eyes and placed one hand on my heart. No countdown, no wish, just breath. When the clock struck 12, I whispered into the quiet, come in, New Year. I've made room. Then I turned back to the canvas, still blank, still waiting. I dipped the brush into a little amber, warm, steady, and with one clear stroke, I began. I didn't know what the painting would become. I didn't need to, because sometimes peace doesn't come from finishing something. It comes from beginning.
There was no toast, no noise, just the soft sound of the brush touching canvas, and the steady beat of my own heart as the year quietly turned. For the first time in a long time, I didn't need anyone else to see me in order to feel like I existed. Sometimes healing isn't loud, it's not dramatic. It's the quiet choice to pick peace over permission, to choose self-respect instead of being needed. If we listen closely to the stillness, to our own small hopes, we might find the courage to begin again, not for anyone else, just for ourselves. If any part of this stirred something in you, I'd be honored to hear your story, maybe a memory, a turning point, or even just one small thing you've done to reclaim your life. And if you'd like to stay with me on this path, you're warmly invited to subscribe and come along for what's next. In the next story, the pain shows up in a way I didn't expect, wrapped in lace and laughter. My son laughed while his bride seated me next to a trash can. That seat suits you. Sometimes the insult is public, but so is the strength it wakes up in us.